once got some good advice about writing. The advice goes like this: a good story, a good speech, or a good sermon should have a clear beginning, a clear middle, and a clear end. But the story of redemption, which I would argue is the story of human history itself, is a story that tests this rule. When does the redemption begin? Where do we find ourselves in the midst of its middle? And when is it complete? Now I have reached the end of the beginning of my Devar Torah, and I will immediately move on to the middle. This Shabbat we begin a new book in our Torah. It's Sefer Shmot, the story of the Exodus, the story of our people's enslavement to Pharaoh in Egypt and the long road to redemption. It's probably the most foundational, the most essential story of Jewish life. It's the basis of the Pesach holiday, when we imagine ourselves ke'ilu, as if this story happened to each of us, and we pass it over to the next generation so that they become part of the story as well. But if it's a good story, and I think it is, when does it begin and when does it end? Where do we start telling the story? The Haggadah itself is unsure, and the rabbis debate. They can't agree on how to begin the Haggadah. So what do in great rabbinic fashion? They include two alternative beginnings, page A and page B, if you like. The first part of the story begins, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. But the second beginning starts with our ancestors were idol worshippers. Does the redemption begin with the birth of Moses that we read about in the Parsha today? Does it begin when the Israelites cry out to God and God hears their cry and resolves to redeem them? Does it begin when the plagues begin? When they reach the sea? When the sea is split? Does it complete itself when they sing a song? When Pharaoh is drowned as the sea returns to its place? Or perhaps when they receive the Torah? No, maybe we wait until they enter the land of Israel, when they build a holy temple, or a second, or a third. It's a Dayenu-esque litany that proves my point, which is that it's really hard to pinpoint the beginning of our redemption and its natural conclusion. And what's true of the story of the redemption from Egypt is true of the ultimate story of redemption of the entire world. It is an ongoing process, continuing until our day, that defies clear beginnings and ends. The one thing that we could all probably agree on is that we find ourselves somewhere in the middle of that story. Remember what I told you a few Shabbatot ago, everything will be all right in the end. And if everything is not all right, well, then it must not be the end. If you tell the story of human history through a Jewish lens, you have on one end of the spectrum the Garden of Eden, a time of peace, when people were in harmony with each other and with nature around them, and God walked among them. And on the other end of the spectrum of human history, you have the Messianic era, which will be a time of peace and harmony as well. All nations will beat their swords into plowshares. The lion will lay down with the lamb, and peace will fill the earth as waters fill the sea. The dead will be resurrected, and all the exiles will be gathered into Israel, and we will bask in that day in the divine presence, studying Torah all day long. Sounds pretty good, don't you think? On one end, we have prehistory, the Garden of Eden, and on the other end, we have the end of history, the end of days. That is the beginning and the end, and everything between the moment when Adam and Eve eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge and the arrival of the Messiah himself or herself is the stuff of human history. And all along the way, we have smaller facsimiles of that larger human story, moments of redemption and exile, joy and pain, loss and gain. A child is born. A loved one dies. We sit Shiva. We celebrate a wedding, a bar mitzvah. We get up from Shiva. We get ill, and then we're healed. And then we relapse. Sunrise, sunset, Tisha B'Av, Rosh Hashanah. The cycles of our days, our seasons, our years, our lives, they ebb and flow with many redemptions and enslavements at every step of the journey. I guess you could say we are living in a perpetual middle time with beginnings, middles, and ends sprinkled throughout. The ambiguity of when the end will come is captured by the debates over how we pray for the state of Israel. We make a bold theological claim when we pray for the modern state of Israel every week. You may not have noticed it. It places us somewhere in the long arc of Jewish and human history. We say that the state of Israel is Reshit Tzmichat Ge'ulatenu. It represents the first flowering of our ultimate redemption. And that language, Reshit Tzmichat Ge'ulatenu, the first flowering of our redemption, it is wonderfully vague. It's the first flowering. Flowering itself is the beginning of a process of growth and development. It's not full harvest. It's not even yet blossomed or bloomed. Our redemption is but a small, delicate flower, first appearing like a Tu B'Shvat bud. But we add even a qualifier to that word flowering, tzmichat. We say reshit, it's the very beginning of the flowering, lest you think that we're already at the middle of the beginning. No, we're at the beginning of the beginning. And our new Siddur has added another phrase, which pushes it back even a little further. They put in brackets, you may have noticed, Shetehei reshit tzmichat kulatenu, that Israel may yet become the first flowering of our redemption. It's sort of a pre-beginning of the beginning. With me? My personal opinion is that the Shetehei is redundant. I don't particularly like it, although I know some of you do. I believe there's enough plasticity of meaning in the words Reshit, Tzmichat themselves to cover a lot of different beliefs about how the modern state of Israel fits into different concepts of redemption, but nevertheless, I digress. The question remains, where are we at this moment in the grand narrative of redemption? What do these major historical developments mean in the grand scheme of things? So many ups and downs, progress and setbacks. I've often quoted Talia's grandmother, and I'll quote here again, when she said, she was a survivor of the Holocaust, and she said, we didn't know it was World War II as it was happening. And I think the wisdom of that statement is that these events are still unfolding before us, and we lack the necessary distance and perspective to understand what they mean. Now, one could conclude from all of this, as the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, does, that all is futile. One season follows another, and the world never changes. What's the point? There's nothing new under the sun. All rivers flow to the sea, and yet the sea is never full. So why bother? But Kohelet, Ecclesiastes notwithstanding, that's not generally how we Jews talk. We don't understand our place in history as futile. Our actions, our lives are not meaningless. Instead, we believe that our lives matter. Our deeds matter. There is a progressive nature to human history and to our existence, that the world is getting better. We are improving. Sure, we backslide. Things break. We need to rebuild. But on the whole, our world is better than the world of our grandparents or their grandparents, isn't it? Do you believe that? I know it feels tested at times, like we're reverting and the world is unraveling into some kind of primordial chaos. But when I take the long view, I actually do believe things are getting better, even if it may not feel that way right now. Whatever you believe, I hope you can believe that we each and collectively have the capacity to make it so, that we're not passive on this journey of making the world better, but to help redeem this world, letaken olam b'malchut Shaddai, to repair it stitch by stitch, is our mission on earth. Even if we don't experience redemption in our lifetime, we hope in some way that we have helped to push ourselves and all of humanity incrementally closer to it. A prayer said, a shiva call paid, $1 given to tzedakah, a tree planted, a kind word, stitching up this very broken world. This is what I believe Reverend Martin Luther King, who we honor this weekend, meant when he said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and each of us have a role in bending that arc. Just like an asymptote with limits you may remember from high school math, we keep striving incrementally for an ideal which is ultimately beyond our reach. But that doesn't mean we're not getting closer with every step we take. Like Zeno's paradox, when you travel from point A to point B, and each time you go half the distance, and then you half it again, and you half it again, we may never reach the destination. But that doesn't mean we're not getting closer. That was a double negative. The steps you took actually did get us closer to our goal. I'm now at the end of the middle of my sermon. This is a complex Shabbat with lots of different emotions in this room. I feel them within me, and I know that they exist here in this very space, both in our personal lives and in our national lives. There's a tenuous ceasefire deal in Israel, and we await the release of hostages. Please God, may they come home tomorrow. May they come home today. May they come home right now. Fires ravaging Los Angeles, a new/old administration in the White House, Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. How are we to be in this whirlwind of emotions? And in between it all, we have Shabbat. Shabbat is supposed to be me'ein olam haba, a taste of the world to come, which is to say a small preview of the Messianic age. You see, in this human existence, we get tired, we get jaded, we lose sight of what it is we're working for, we feel like we're not making progress, we lose hope, the world beats us down. So God, in God's benevolence, gives us little rest stops along the journey to buy coffee from Dunkin' Donuts or refuel our car or get back on the road. Okay, the metaphor doesn't work so well. I don't think anyone has ever said at a rest stop on the New Jersey Turnpike, this is truly a taste of the world to come. Except for the Whitney Houston rest stop. I really like that one. But you know what I mean, when we feel drained, when we need islands of space and time where we can refill our emotional and spiritual resources to face the world anew, well, that's what Shabbat is intended to be. Shabbat is an island in time and space. It's when we remind ourselves of what it might feel like if we actually did achieve building a better world. It's a time where families are reunited and spend time together, where food like chili has extra spice and cookies have extra sweetness, where we bask in the presence of each other and God so that we can return to the world, a world that needs us in it, and make it a little better. There are other islands. Shabbat is not the only. What is your island of rest that reminds you of what it is we're working for? I remember when Johnny Cash, I saw this, I didn't hear him say it, but he was asked once in an interview, what is heaven? And Johnny Cash said, in the morning, having coffee with her. Little island of the world to come. And now I've reached the end. I'll conclude with a midrash. And it's a midrash that I encountered by accident. I was actually looking for a different midrash, and I stumbled upon this one, and I didn't know what it meant. So I sat with it a bit, and I'm going to share with you my perspective, but I hope we'll study it together sometime, and I'd love to hear what you think. Here's the Midrash. It comes from the Talmud in Masechet Sota. It says that when Miriam, Moses' older sister, Aaron's younger sister, when Miriam was a child, she would walk around the house saying, "In the future, my mother will give birth to a son who will save the Jewish people." And when Moses was born, the entire house was filled with light. Some say it was the original light of the divine presence that was there at the beginning of creation. And her father, Amram, arose and kissed Miriam on the head. And he said to her, "My daughter, your prophecy has been fulfilled." And once they put Moses into the river, her father arose and hit her on the head. And he said to her, "My daughter, where is your prophecy now?" And this is as it is written, say the rabbis, and his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. That's the story. And I sat with it. What did they mean? Miriam was standing afar, say the rabbis, to see what would happen with her prophecy. She didn't know. Will this child be the redeemer of the people of Israel? That's what I think will happen, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to watch over him and protect him, and maybe give him a chance to be so. Her father, when the child is born, assumes that the prophecy has been fulfilled. And then when he has to part with his child, he assumes that the prophecy is crushed. But Miriam maintains a certain kind of faith throughout. Let's see. We know not how this story will end, but I'm going to do my part in caring for my brother so that maybe we will have a chance to redeem this world. I pray this Shabbat that we have Miriam's strength to do whatever it is we can to try and move us one step closer, God willing, to a more redeemed world. Shabbat Shalom, which is another way of saying the end.